welcome to A Yarn Tale. This is a knitting podcast. My name is Karen and I'm coming to you from Chicago, where I live with my husband, our 3 kids, and Max, the dog. So we're gonna do something a little bit different today. Usually I try to record on the weekends and then upload sometime early in the week. But this weekend's gonna be pretty busy because we're gonna have some visits with family that we haven't seen since the before times, since January of 2020. So I don't think that's gonna leave a lot of time for podcasting. So I thought it's a little early for me to do a full-blown podcast episode because I've made some progress on my projects, but not enough that it would be really interesting to look at. So I thought maybe today I'd just check in and we could have a little chat, maybe knit together for a short while. It is pretty quiet here today. My kids have all returned to school in person, which is a small miracle. So it's very, very quiet. I thought it would be a great time to sit down, relax, knit a little bit on my Hisho shawl, which I am valiantly trying to finish, and just check in with you guys and see how you're doing and what you're working on. So I just wanted to say before we get started, a big thank you to all of the people who checked out the video and hit like or subscribe. I got so many lovely comments, and it just really warmed my heart to hear from other knitters and people who wanted to share what they're working on or had some great pattern ideas. I had some really good recommendations for summer tees, so I appreciate that. And I love hearing from you. I read all the comments, and I love seeing what you guys are all up to, so please keep it up. If you're new here, welcome, and if you're checking out the video again as a returning viewer, thank you so much, and it's wonderful to see you. So I thought that today I might share a little bit about how I started knitting. Okay, so I'm gonna be looking down a lot because I'm knitting while I'm talking. I don't really know how this is gonna go. I know I've seen a lot of podcasts where people are able to knit without looking, which to me seems a little bit like voodoo magic. I can't even knit that well while I'm looking, so I don't think it's gonna be improved by not looking. I actually, in an effort to get more reading done, because I love to read, I've watched videos. This is how sad my life has become. I have actually watched videos on how people knit and read at the same time, because I've heard of such things. And I don't know, it seems like you have to hold your knitting up pretty high and again, just not look at it. And also be able to process what you're reading with your brain at the same time, which I don't know, maybe other people's brains work faster than mine, or maybe they're just stronger knitters, or maybe they're, I don't know. I tried it and I can only do like 3 stitches and it's really stressful. So I think I'm just gonna have to pick one or the other. Long story to say that I'm sorry if I'm looking down too much for this. We're gonna try it out and see how it goes. Okay, so I thought I would share a little bit about how I started knitting, because it wasn't that long ago. I actually remember how it went. So I started knitting in December of 2019 because I read an article in the New York Times. I looked it up actually in preparation for this podcast, and it was originally an article that was published in 2018, but I think they resurrected it again in the end of 2019 as some kind of lifestyle, New Year's, it's getting to the beginning of the new year, learn a new skill, be a new you. And this particular article recommended knitting as a new skill that you should check out. And I am a complete sucker for, New Year's projects where, every New Year's I think, this year I'm gonna meditate and I'm gonna do yoga, and I'm also gonna make my own jam and learn to embroider and be a completely different, much better person. So in December of 2019, I read this article, and the thing that stuck with me most was it recommended specifically that your first knitting project be a hat as opposed to a scarf, because most people who've tried knitting and abandoned it have just kind of abandoned it because they knit forever on a scarf that they then grew to slowly hate. And this article kind of suggested that a hat is a shorter project, and while it might be a little bit more complicated, the end product is something that more people would enjoy. So it just so happens that at that time, that whatever hat I was wearing, I don't even remember what it was, had developed this hole in it, and I was kind of in the market for a new hat. And I thought to myself, well, heck, I'm not gonna buy a hat if I could make one. I could make a hat. This didn't sound that bad. So I looked on the internet and I found some sort of free hat pattern that was supposed to be, it was billed for complete new knitters, someone who never picked up a needle. And I thought, that's me. And I bought whatever they suggested. I got some bulky gray acrylic yarn from Joann's or Michael's, but I think it was Joann's, and some kind of circular needle, and just kind of had at it. I watched a bunch of videos and cast on my long tail cast on. It was basically a 2x2 rib all the way up. There was no crown decreases or shaping of any kind, or really anything other than knit 2, purl 2 for eternity until you got this long tube, and then you just ran your yarn through your stitches at the end, cinched it up, and voila, hat. So I did my long tail cast on and watched some videos for how to do a knit stitch and how to do a purl stitch, and just to show how completely new I was, I didn't realize that it really mattered where your working yarn was. So, for the knit stitch, it has to be in the back, and for the pearls, it has to be in the front, And so I didn't do that. I just kind of, did whatever I thought I was doing correctly. And so, as you can imagine, I had 1,000,001 yarn overs that kept appearing in my knitting, and I was really confused. Like, what are these extra little things, and how do I get rid of them? So I watched some Martha Stewart tutorial about how to fix mistakes in knitting. And I learned how to tink back. So every row I tinked back like 50 stitches, because then I would see my yarn overs, and I didn't, of course, realize that you could just drop the yarn over off your needle. So I just went back. I must have knitted this hat each row 2 or 3 times when you figured in all the tinking. So I just kind of slogged away at it for a couple of weeks, and it was working. And then after I forget when I realized, I watched some other video that finally it clicked in that my working yarn had to be in a particular place. And then once I figured that out, it got much easier, no surprise. So I knit this hat, and I dug around in my drawer, and I still have it. Like, you guys, check this out. It is like something out of Dr. Seuss. It's really wide at the bottom, it's really tall at the top, and of course I found this ridiculous giant faux fur pom-pom also at Joann's, and I thought, well, obviously I need that. I'm buying it, and I stuck it on, which was kind of ill-advised because it's too heavy, and it kind of just makes the whole thing like pull over, and since there's no crown shaping, it just slides off your head. It's not a good hat. But I wore this thing for months. And every person I saw, I'd be like, oh my gosh, I made this hat. Look at this thing that I made. And even where I can see here, where I tried to weave in my ends, did I do it and it pulled out? Did I just not really do it? I don't know. I don't even care. I keep it for sentimental reasons, and I sometimes put it on as a joke. Wear it as a little joke to myself, but it does kind of remind me that, you too can do new things. So I like that. So that was that. And once I made that, then I was like, gosh, this isn't so bad. And I pulled up another free hat pattern. It wasn't through Ravelry because I didn't know Ravelry existed. It was some kind of other pattern, also using the same yarn, that had a really small cable running up the front. And I can't find that hat. I think it had an unfortunate washing machine incident where it is no longer with us. But I did a little cabled hat that did have some crown decreases and so, some shaping. I think there was maybe a knit two together in there or a center decrease or some kind of thing that made it fit better on my head. And once I got through those decrease stitches, then I kind of realized it's not very hard to learn new stitches once you have the basic motion of knitting kind of down. And that kind of, then the horse was out of the barn. And I thought, well, I mean, why am I wasting my time knitting hats when I could be making all sorts of other things? So I decided I wanted to knit a sweater. And I looked around and I didn't really know where to start. And I didn't really know if I would be able to do this. But I found the Sunday sweater by PetiteKnit. I don't know if you're familiar with it. I think it's in bulky weight. I use the yarn that they suggested. It's Snufnug, which is this really squishy alpaca yarn. I think it's alpaca, held double with silk mohair. And I was worried because when I looked up the quantity of yarn that you need for an adult size sweater, even in a smaller size, it's a lot of yarn. And of course, if you use the yarn recommended in the pattern, I think I ordered it from Denmark or something ridiculous. So it was kind of expensive. And I thought, well, okay, maybe I should make a less fancy sweater first to make sure that I can make a sweater before I spend all this money on yarn and kind of wreck it. But then I thought, no, I'm not going to spend all this time on a garment or trying to make a garment that I'm not going to like in the end. I kind of thought if I bought something that was more reasonable, maybe I wouldn't like it. I don't know. Basically, nobody knew what I was doing, and there was nobody there to say, no, don't spend hundreds of dollars on luxury yarn for your first garment. No, don't do that. And I thought, it wasn't hundreds of dollars. It was just whatever they recommended. So I went ahead and bought it, and I was a little bit intimidated because I'd never even knit a swatch. But I did it. I knit my swatch, and I figured out my gauge, I think. It was mostly, looking back on it, I don't know if you're familiar with this sweater, and I'll pop a picture up so you can see, but it was actually not a bad pick for a first sweater. It's top down, seamless, and it's a yoke construction, so the front's the same as the back. There's no short row shaping. And it has kind of a knits and pearls pattern as the yoke increases down. And then you throw some stitches on waist yarn and knit the body down. The body's all stockinette, the sleeves are all stockinette. There's not even decreases or a lot of decreases on the sleeves. I think there's actually increases. It's kind of a giant sleeve that then narrows down really fast into this kind of balloony effect for a cuff at the cuff. And the hardest part of the whole thing was you have to use DPNs or magic loop for the cuffs, not for the sleeves. So I actually got down the whole sleeve, but then once you get to the cuff, you have to use DPNs because it really is at that point too narrow. So that was, it was only a few rows. And it was so hard. It was really hard to join in the round, and I got really jumbled up with all the DPNs. I don't know. I lost a lot of stitches, and I had to keep picking them up, and it was just, it was a lot. But I fumbled my way through, and it's not the prettiest cuff, but I was super proud of it. I managed to produce this sweater at the end. And it was a little bit more narrow than I was looking for, but then it blocked out fine because of the alpaca, so that was great. And once I finished my first sweater, then I finally found Ravelry, and then I saw all of the amazing projects people were making, and I got on Instagram and just wanted to make all the things. So here we are. That was that. And I guess my biggest takeaway from this is, if you don't know that something is supposed to be hard, or that a lot of people don't like to do that particular thing, sometimes it's not that bad. I didn't know that people don't usually start knitting and then, a month later make an adult size sweater. I don't know. I just thought it can't be that bad, right? And so since I didn't know any knitters in real life, I didn't kind of have anybody to put the brakes on or say, maybe knit a scarf first, or maybe make something child size, or, maybe try a shawl. No. And I'm kind of glad I had nobody to say, don't do that, because once you knit a sweater, then you kind of feel like you can make anything you want. So I'm happy about that. And that's that. I don't really have anything more to say on that point. I don't know what your first projects were, but I'd love to hear about it. The only other thing I really wanted to share was I love to read. I have read less since I started knitting, because my knitting time and my reading time are kind of the same time. And like I said before, I'm not able to knit and read. I'm hoping one day to get there, but I'm not quite there yet. So I've been reading slower, or a little bit less than I did before I started knitting, but I still read. So I kind of wanted to share what I'm reading, because I'm always up for a good book rec if there's books that you love, and maybe we can get to that. So I've gotten really into Tana French. I don't know if you know her. She writes a lot of mystery novels. I had read her book, The Witch Elm, last year. It's a standalone novel. It's a fictional murder mystery where at the beginning, very early parts of the book, they find a body in a hollow tree and have to figure out what happened there, who it is, and how it got there. And it is excellent. It's excellent. I still think about it sometimes, even all this time later. And it kind of got me thinking that I'd love to read something else of hers. And I was wondering if she had written other books. Haha. So I looked it up, and as it turns out, she's written a ton of books that everybody loves. So I was a little bit late to the Tana French party, per usual, but I was glad that I finally got there. So I realized once I looked into it that a bunch of her early novels were inspiration for a show on Starz called, on here it says The Dublin Murders, but I actually thought it was The Murder Squad. I don't know. Anyway, I haven't watched the show because I want to read all the books first. But I finished the first one in the series called In the Woods, which was good. It was not as good as The Witch Elm, and I was worried about it because it's fiction, but it involves a murder mystery that has kids in it. And I do love a good crime novel, but I'm not that great with crimes involving children because it's just too much. But I powered through because I like The Witch Elm, and I like her writing. And as it turns out, it wasn't too much gory, horrible details involving children. It more focuses on the relationships of the detectives that are trying to solve the mystery, and I like that a lot. So that was a good one. This book involves the main detective who's trying to solve the case was himself the survivor of a long ago cold case in the same small village in Ireland. So it kind of involves details of the old case and then the new case, and they sort of loop back together in a way that's really interesting. And I like that a lot. The next book in the series is called The Likeness. I'm in the middle of it now. I'm actually in the first part of it now. So this one, the narrator is a different detective that was working on the first case in the Woods book. It's a different primary narrator, but it's a really interesting premise. The main detective who's trying to solve the murder mystery used to work undercover, and she used an alias when she was undercover, and then left the undercover division and moved to the murder squad. So the victim in this second mystery is identified is using the alias that the detective used to use when she was undercover. I don't know if that makes sense. So the undercover cop used to call herself Lexi, and the victim of the crime that she is trying to solve is looks exactly like her and is identified as Lexi, whatever her last name is. So it's really freaky because when they looked at the body, they were like, oh my gosh, they thought it was her, and then they were. So it's unclear whether she must be some kind of identity thief that somehow appropriated that undercover alias before she was killed. So super interesting. It's kind of more than a murder mystery. It's kind of trying to figure out who the victim really is and what she was doing using that alias at the time of her death. So cool. Kind of the great thing about Tana French is she's a good writer, and she kind of upends some of the conventions of the murder mystery genre, or has some kind of interesting twists on it, which, I appreciate. I'm always up for a new thing. So I'm gonna work my way through those. I don't know if there's 5 or 6 of the Murder Squad books, and I don't know if it's a different detective every time, or if I'm gonna read them straight through, or if I'm gonna take a break and read some other books and then go back to them to see how I feel at the end of this second one. All right. I had to pause the video there for a second because Max came back from his walk and he was running around like a dog possessed. So now he is settled on the back of the couch. Max, say hi. Hi. Okay, so the only other book that I have read recently, I'm gonna set this down gently because there's so many stitches on the needles now for this shawl that whenever I set it down, it just wants to spring right off the needles because all the stitches are jammed on there. I think this will be safe. So the only other book that I've read recently is this one. It's called Song of Achilles. I don't know if you're familiar with Madeline Miller, but she wrote this book in 2012. It is a modern retelling of the story of Achilles, and it focuses on the relationship that he had with his best friend, and in this case, lover, Patroclus. Okay, you guys, I am a nerd, and when I was in school, I studied Western Civ, and I read the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Aeneid and Aristotle and a whole bunch of Kant and things nobody but other nerds like me like to read. And we read a ton of Greek myths. And I know for sure someone somewhere must have said the name Patroclus out loud, but I, for the life of me, cannot remember how they said it. I have no memory of that. It's been replaced entirely by nursery rhymes and sippy cups. And so I'm gonna go with Patroclus, but if I am wrecking it with my ignorant self, I apologize. Please tell me in the comments and I'll do my best to do better next time. But this book is a retelling of Achilles' story. It goes through lots of the Trojan War, and it tells the story of Agamemnon and Hector. And if you like that kind of thing, you'll recognize a lot of the characters. It was a really interesting read. I will say there's a lot of interpersonal drama. It reads a little bit like YA fiction. I don't know. It seems weird to say that a modern retelling of Achilles would be a little bit like middle school drama-rama, but it kind of was. So I don't know how much I like that aspect of it, but I did think it was interesting to look at the story in a new way. Earlier last year, I think it was, or the year before, I read a more recent book by Madeline Miller called Circe, which kind of in the same vein, it's a modern retelling of the story of Circe, who, if you're familiar, she's in Greek mythology, she's kind of a monster. She was in exile. And that book was very strong. It's always nice to see an author getting better. I kind of feel like she hit her stride, Madeline Miller, somewhere in the interim, because the Circe book, although in the traditional myth, Circe is kind of a monster, in the novel she's very likable, or at least relatable or understandable. And so that was a really kind of a new take on a familiar story, or even if you're not familiar with the story, it's worth a read. It's Madeline Miller has a lovely writing style that will kind of, it's worth a read even if you're not a big fan of the story to begin with, or familiar with the story. So that's all I'm reading right now. I haven't really been watching a lot of shows. I watch knitting podcasts just so that I have someone to knit with. There's a bunch that I'm sure you've heard of. Some of the ones that you may not have heard of that I enjoy are Southern Knits in the Mitt. She's kind of a new podcaster from Michigan. She's from the South. And she makes really amazing projects and just kind of has a lovely way about her. So I would recommend looking up her podcast. I'm trying to think. There's a ton, but I'm not going to run through my embarrassing list of thousands of podcasters that I listen to. If you have a knitting podcast that you love that I might not have heard of, I would love to know about it because I'm always up for a new knitting friend. And that's kind of all I have there. I hope you have a lovely week, and I'll check in after my family visitors have left, and hopefully I'll have maybe a finished shawl, or if things go really well, maybe a finished sweater. Promises. I don't know, maybe not. I hope your knitting treats you well, and you have a nice week. I'll talk to you soon. Bye. Patroclus?